America is home to 33 million small businesses, the beating heart of communities across the country.
And proof that the American dream is still alive.
This is a show about those dreamers and doers and the communities they serve.
Their real life stories.
Their struggles and successes.
Their grit, determination, and passion.
And the people who fight
to keep their American dream alive.
I'm Alfredo Ortiz.
I'm Elaine Parker.
And it's time for another episode of Main Street Matters,
America's small business megaphone.
Hi, and welcome to another episode of Main Street Matters, America's small business megaphone. I'm Elaine Parker, the president of the Job Creators Network Foundation.
And I'm Alfredo Ortiz, CEO of Job Creators Network.
You can subscribe to the show at salempodcastnetwork.com or wherever you get your podcast from. So, Alfredo, today we are going to be joined by Bob Luddy. And Bob has an interesting story as a businessman, but also in the education field, actually education reform. Bob purchased a sheet metal shop in 1981. I believe he had about $1,200 in his pocket, but we'll ask him what that exact number was. It wasn't much. And he transformed it into a company called Captive Air Systems. And today, Captive Air provides a wide range of commercial and industrial ventilation products, and he employs over 1,600 people with 100 sales offices and 6 manufacturing facilities nationwide. I don't think you can go into a restaurant in this country and not see Captive Air in the back for their ventilation.
Yeah, it's a great story. I'm very excited to actually talk to him about it. And as you know, he was actually also one of our first board members way back when you first started with Job Creators.
Yep, back in the day. Before he joins us, though, I would like to spend a little bit of time gloating because we have been vindicated once again. Major League Baseball is moving their game, the All-Star game, back to Georgia in 2025. They announced that in the last few days. And for those listening and watching, JCN filed a lawsuit against Major League Baseball back in 2021 when they pulled the game out of Georgia just a few months before because of the Georgia voting law that was passed after the 2020 election, which you can probably imitate Governor Kemp better than I can, but
it made it easy to vote and hard to cheat.
Exactly. You've got a better accent than I do.
Nothing like a Mexican with a Southern accent.
Yes, and you carry that off very well. But the voting law was attacked by the woke mob and activists like Stacey Abrams, who really maligned this law, which really expanded voting opportunities, but ensured the integrity of the voting system. And not only were we vindicated when they had record turnout for voting in the subsequent election, but they also are now Major League Baseball is bringing the game back. So, you know, it just shows what this woke mob can do to a city. I mean, they really punished minority small business owners.
Yeah, they absolutely did. Remember, $100 million of potential lost revenue was what was calculated in terms of the impact that it had on minority small business owners. And remember that you and I spoke to, a dozen or so of them that were first willing to actually talk on record and publicly about it. But quite frankly, after the Abrams mob visited each one of those people, they effectively shut them up. And it was horrifying to see how the left mob really actually works and seeing that up close and personal. But I'm glad we did the lawsuit, even though we lost that lawsuit up in New York against Major League Baseball, because I think we won in the court of public opinion. And I think that's what really mattered. And quite frankly, I think, even talking to Governor Kemp, he credits us with, in big part, his win to our lawsuit and in terms of what the impact it had on a negative basis to Stacey Abrams. Because quite frankly, not only did she malign, but she just outright lied on so many different levels and lied to the Georgia public and the voting public. And so I am glad that the game's moving back. And I'm just waiting for our box seats from the commissioner.
Well, I don't think we lost the lawsuit in the sense of Major League Baseball won and we lost, because as you know, it's just obviously legal steps in a lawsuit. We were dismissed for lack of standing, and the reason why we
Right,
didn't
right,
have the standing is because
right. That's why
our
you're the
members in
communications person and I'm not.
well, I don't like to say that we even lost in the court. We didn't get a chance to put our case on because the first hurdle in any lawsuit is to prove that you have standing, that you've been injured.
Yeah, and being in the court, I will agree with that, Elaine. I mean, it was an Obama appointee. She already had basically. She didn't even give us a chance. I mean, it was already written. In fact, I wouldn't be surprised if she had some assistance from the MLB itself. But again, I guess I shouldn't be saying that. But I certainly wouldn't doubt it. Just being in that courtroom with the 12 attorneys sitting behind us representing Major League Baseball. It was a pretty cozy relationship between that and the judge, I have to tell you.
Well, interesting, but you're right. We did win in the court of public opinion. And I think that the decision to bring the game back to Georgia certainly vindicates our position and Governor Kemp's position that this law was not going to discriminate against anybody or inhibit people's voting rights, and in fact expanded them. So I'm glad to see that in the end, the right thing won.
Yeah, absolutely. And so remember too that's kind of where we started a lot of our boardroom initiative and the idea to do what we were doing in that front, because that was something that we saw all these corporations jump into it, basically sight unseen kind of thing, and just join the crowd, join the mob on this one. And they were all, quite frankly, I think, embarrassed after this was all said and done.
I hope so.
Yeah.
We can only hope. Well, now it is time for our interview with Bob Luddy. He's a strong advocate of excellent education. Bob establishes schools that help youth develop good character and reasoning skills. In 1998, he established the Franklin Academy, a public charter school in Wake Forest, North Carolina, and what is now one of the largest and most successful charter schools in that state. In 2001, Bob founded the St. Thomas More Academy, a classical college preparatory high school in Raleigh. And in 2007, he opened Thales Academy, a network of private schools offering high quality pre-K through 12 education at an affordable tuition rate. The Luddy schools are growing quickly. Over 6,000 students are enrolled throughout North Carolina, Tennessee, and Virginia. So very exciting.
Yeah, it's a great program. Like I said, I'm really excited to have him on because I do want to talk to him about his wonderful story about Captive Air, but also the story of the academy, because on both fronts it's a lot there and a lot that we can celebrate on his behalf.
Bob, welcome to Main Street Matters, America's small business megaphone. Thanks so much for joining us.
Elaine, it's a pleasure to be with you here today.
And Bob, thank you again for taking the time to do this. I am so excited to have you on. I remember a few years ago, I had the pleasure of touring your facility. I was so impressed with everything, and we would love to kind of hear the story actually, and have our listeners hear the story of how you got to where you got to, because I know it was another incredible American dream story, just like so many of our board members and other freedom fighters that we have as part of our membership. And so I'd love for you to just kind of talk to us about that and the journey that you took to where you got to today.
Yeah, well, I founded Captive Air in 1976, and most of the time, the things we hear about small business, I wasn't able to really follow them. I didn't have a particular business plan. I didn't have any money, and didn't have any particular knowledge of the industry that I ultimately entered. But what I did have was a drive to improve both fire suppression and kitchen ventilation. And I think one of the things that I learned along the way is we tend to think that businesses need to be well financed. There has to be a detailed business plan. And that may be appropriate in many cases, but also the desire to improve and the experience of learning as you grow, as you move forward, has a very high value. So one of the things I've learned is that by starting ground up with very little money, it requires you to be very resourceful. Essentially, you have to win every day or you're not in business. So
Right.
you might say it's not the recommended way to start a business, but it's a good way.
Yeah.
And the other thing is, I think devoting yourself to a particular industry over a very long period of time is very beneficial. So we often hear about serial entrepreneurs or people that sell their business at a young age and do whatever they do. I think we should ask people to stay in their business for a long period of time to the extent possible, because that's how they're going to make the greatest contribution.
Right.
So Captive Air moved from installing fire suppression systems to installing ventilation systems to manufacturing ventilation systems, and eventually somewhat transforming the commercial kitchen ventilation industry into a more modern industry with new standards, new technologies, etc. Now we've progressed to a point after about 40 plus years. We're in the HVAC business and we're trying to do the same thing in commercial buildings. So in year 48, Captive Air has transformed itself again to a broader industry with full integration and very modern and useful technologies that essentially allow clean air in buildings, positive pressure, low velocity air delivery, and most important, temperature and humidity control, which has been a challenge over a period of years, but
Right.
current technology allows for that.
Yeah, I think what that shows, Bob, too, is that if you clearly understand what you're in the business of doing in this particular case, it wasn't just about restaurant ventilation, right? That was the product, but the actual what you guys do, ventilation in general, it really allows you to expand your market and find new opportunity, which is great. I wanted to talk a little bit about that journey, though, because if I remember correctly, you told me that you started with like $1,500 or something like
Yeah,
that.
$1,300.
$1,300.
It seems laughable today, but that's what happened.
Yeah, but it really represents, I think, a lot of what is really that American dream, right? You saw the opportunity, you pursued it, you did have a vision, and you went for it. The operation is really amazing. And correct me if I'm wrong here, but back then when I toured the facility, you told me that you had actually zero finished goods inventory, and that you basically could turn around and order almost in a matter of a week. Is that still kind of the case with everything that's been happening with supply chain disruptions and stuff like that?
It is. So think about that. We don't make anything until we have an order, and we make it very quickly. And even better, we ship from a factory to a building, a facility, a rooftop. It's a highly efficient model, very hard to replicate, very hard to improve efficiency on that type of model.
Yeah. It was absolutely amazing. And just, I am curious though, because I know during COVID, you and I spoke a little bit, and it was obviously challenging because new restaurants weren't opening, which was a big part of, your portfolio back then. But the disruption of finished goods products and inventory was a big deal for you back then. Has that improved, or is you're still?
Yeah, that's improved substantially. It was a severe problem in 21 and 22. But one of the things we did, which shows you have to adapt, we abandoned just in time back in 2020.
Okay.
Which meant we were going to outsource from any place that we could to get components. And that kept our lines operating. In one extreme case, we had to buy an electronic component batch that would have cost about $50,000. And the cost to purchase it was $1.5 million.
Wow.
But that was the difference in keeping our assembly lines running, because that one component would have stopped the assembly line.
Wow.
It was the clock on the computer board. So sometimes you have to make very hard decisions.
Right.
But in a sense, the decision wasn't hard. We're going to serve our customers.
Right.
And we may have a near-term loss, but in the long term, we came out of the whole pandemic in a very strong position. We never shut down. We never closed offices.
Wow.
And so we didn't have to deal with the work at home challenge that many businesses do today.
Well, it's amazing. The story of Captivator really truly is amazing, and congratulations on all the success and redefining yourself, and look forward to another 50 years probably of Captivator. I mean, that's it's super exciting. But just kind of now moving a little bit to what I would call your passion that has now turned almost to another business that you're involved in, which is in the education space. And I always get this wrong how I pronounce it. Thales?
Thales is correct.
All right. I got it
You
right.
get an A today, Alfredo.
I remember a little bit my math history now. So talk to us about Thales Academy, how you even started, your vision for that. And I know Elaine's got questions on the education front for you on that, but please walk us through that, because this is an amazing story as well.
Well, if we can go back to 1998, I opened a public charter school in North Carolina. And that was a tremendous learning experience. But one of the things I learned was, even though people didn't know about charter schools, in year one, we filled up. In year two, we had a waiting list. And we had to go to a lottery, which is a state law. So it affirmed in my mind that people were very hungry for better choices. North Carolina had a limit on the number of charter schools. And additionally, I knew that long term, I didn't want to develop a lot of charter schools because eventually there'll be more governmental restriction. So in 2006, I had a group of parents come into our corporate office one evening, and we discussed the potential of a private school. And it was a very affirming meeting. So the following year in 2007, I opened Thales Academy in the back part of our corporate office. At that time, we had extra space, so we built up a demising wall, built some classrooms, and literally launched it out of our corporate headquarters, which is fairly unique.
Yeah.
But I think it brings a point, an important point. Business leaders need to do more than just sending money or giving speeches. They need to get personally involved.
Yeah.
Because they have experience, they have contacts, they have financial capabilities. So Thales was launched in 2007, and in 2008, we had two buildings open, one in Northern Wake and one in Southern Wake, and Thales was on the ground. And the idea was in a private school, we could pick our own curriculum. We were basically unrestricted. We rejected all teacher licensing and accreditation. Incidentally, colleges do not care about K-12 accreditation. So parents think accreditation is important, and really it's only important if you want government money. Thales doesn't want government money, and as a result, we didn't need accreditation. It took a while for the parents to adjust, but once they saw students getting into all these colleges, they figured, okay, what you told us was absolutely correct. So private initiatives allow for new ideas, new concepts, and continuous improvement, which is very hard to do in the public sector.
Now, Bob, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think part of the impetus too was you finding that there wasn't skilled labor out there. I mean, real challenging. You're like, how are we going to find more skilled labor? And I think you started something which I think I find fascinating. And if I remember correctly, it's called LIT, the Luddy Institute of Technology, where
yes.
it was an internship basically program. Can you talk to us about that and how that kind of also helped you shape what you're doing with Thales?
Yeah, a couple of things I failed to mention. So we use direct instruction in K-5, and that teaches students to be good readers, good reading comprehension, good math. It also teaches them the discipline of learning. So by the time they get to the 6th grade, we move into the classic curriculum, which I like to describe as learning from the masters of 2,500 years all the way back to Thales. Then we began in the 9-12 grades, Luddy Institute of Technology, which is 1 hour of engineering and vocational education for 4 years. So students can elect into the program, and that encompasses anything from woodworking, electrical, basic theories of engineering. And so even students that wouldn't necessarily go into engineering will enter that program. And then subsequently, we pushed vocational education back to the 6-8. So regardless, all academic students receive some level of vocational skills, including how to use tools, the basics of physics in 6-8. And that program now has expanded to a point where we actually need more facilities, because once students began to realize how valuable it was, we were filled to capacity. So we're trying to expand that program. And I think it's one of the few places in high school where you can actually study engineering in high school, beginning with your 9th grade.
And I think what's fascinating about that program is that if you graduate, let's say, from LIT, the Light Institute of Technology, you actually graduate with a job. Is that correct?
Well, that's kind of a separate program. We also have a thing called NC TAP.
Okay.
So students can go directly into a job out of high school, get paid.
Okay.
And the companies afford them the opportunity to go to college and pay for it and learn as basically a trainee in whatever industry they're involved in.
Okay.
Typically with NC TAP, all students complete 2 years of college and their apprenticeship.
Okay.
Some students who want to can continue on and get a 4-year degree. So it's a really terrific program.
Yeah.
When you consider the employers are paying the bill and they're paying the student while they learn.
Right. Right. Yeah. No, it's fascinating. I think, I just love talking about this because I think you really have proven that there's multiple models out there that are very effective, other than the ones that we just keep using over and over and over that, quite frankly, were from the 1950s. We just keep using them again and expecting different results. And as you and I have talked about, it's a disaster right now what we're seeing in our public education system. So I love the fact that you have different models out there that people can look at and tap into, and in many cases recreate. I know you've been very involved across, even outside of North Carolina, in doing that. So really appreciate that effort. Elaine, I know we have more focus on education, that you wanted some questions for Bob.
Can I add one more comment?
Yeah, please,
I was
Bob.
reading an article today that in many cases where we force students into college, they don't receive a really good college education. They have a lot of debt. They're going to make way less income than students that learn vocational skills.
Yeah.
Because the demand for anyone that has any type of vocational skills is overwhelming today.
Yeah.
And when you have high demand, supply demand, they're going to be very well paid.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know Elaine is going to talk about, as you know, we sued the Biden administration on the whole college loan bailout. We'll talk about that a little bit later as well.
Yeah, Bob, you are just a poster child for entrepreneurism, not only with your company in Captive Air and growing it to what it is, but becoming a disruptor in education reform within your state, and creating models where children can learn differently. I think that's very noble and just fantastic. But as you've moved into what, your passion and where you've made a huge difference in education, what do you identify as the primary challenges in our U.S. education system?
The challenges are somewhat overwhelming. Curriculum is a major challenge. Discipline is a huge challenge. Lack of character formation. So if you think about students that go to public school, if they have no discipline, what happens when they get into the workplace? They're not used to going to school on time. If they don't feel like going to school on a given day, maybe they don't show up. They don't have respect for the teachers. That's all bred into them in the public school system. Whereas conversely, we require students to be on time every day. And there's no such a thing as taking days off unless they're sick or have some other problem. We stress character formation. Dress code is enforced. And one of the things that does is it makes it a safer place for all students. So most students that go to public schools realize they're not very safe at times. So we provide a safe, nurturing environment, and in that environment, you can learn. Whereas if you have a disruptive environment, you're worried about your personal safety, it builds stress in, and your learning capabilities are greatly reduced.
Yeah, I mean, I think those are all good points, and you know, some of those start at home as well, but in some of the breakdown in our family units, I think is what you see, and then that kind of carries over on the discipline side into going into school. And yeah, I mean, I see how some of the kids act nowadays, and it is got to be very difficult and challenging. I have friends who are teachers in the public school system, and it is a challenging environment. And several of my friends have no desire to be in a high school. They want to stay at the younger levels, you know, first, second, third grade, just because the older kids are so disobedient in the classroom, and the disruptions affect many other students. So it's kind of a broader issue beyond education as well.
Yeah, you know, students in direct instruction, so all the way from pre-K to the end of fifth grade, we require all students to pay attention at all times. If they refuse to pay attention, they send them to the office. And
Mhm.
students quickly learn, you're here to learn. So they learn the discipline of learning. And as they learn, they become excited about learning because they actually know something. So they can go home and tell their parents, this is what I learned today. So that process develops the future student when they move into more complex theory of classic education and literature and history, et cetera, and mathematics.
Yeah, and what is the population size for your schools? I think smaller populations tend to create an environment that's easier to learn in. Do you have a smaller population as well?
Well, a typical school that we have, a K5 or a K8, would be about 500 students. And the class size average is about 25. But in direct instruction, we build a group. So a group could be 6 or it could be 30, but they're all at the same ability, so they can move at the same pace. That ability grouping is reviewed every month. So if a student's falling behind, they're pushed to a lower group. If they're moving ahead, they move to a higher group. And if they're with the group, they stay the same. Now, just the fact that you got pushed down doesn't mean you will stay down, because as you master that level, you'll be moved to the next level. So it's really an incredibly well thought out system by Zig Engelman, who died a couple of years ago, but he spent 50 years developing the system. So parents tend to think of, they want the new, in public schools particularly, we want newfangled. This is something that's really old, has been proven over 50 years, and doesn't need any new innovation.
What is your viewpoint on standardized testing, and do you implement it in your schools? You know, some parents, you know, whenever the tests come around, the nightmare of some of their kids get sick in the morning just because they're so nervous about these standardized tests that is just a pass-fail situation. What is your viewpoint, and how do you use or not use in your schools?
Well, two things. One, in North Carolina, they have what's called an end of grade test. And that's a test designed by the state, and they make a big issue about it. And they publish the data. In the private school, we do not have to take that test. So currently we use Iowa Basic Skills, and we only take that test for the purpose of saying, how well are we doing versus requirements. So for example, if a student's doing very poor at capitalization or some other aspects of grammar, the teacher can pick up on it for improvement. But we don't use it as a high stakes test. It has nothing to do with their grades. It's just a test that says, how are they doing and how can we improve? There's some newer tests coming out that we're looking at that do even a better job. So the purpose of that test is to create improvement for the student and for the teacher with any particular student. It's not a high stakes. We don't make a big issue out of the data, and it's given over a period of time, so students, they really don't get too worried about it.
I know it's kind of the nightmare time of year in my world with my friends and their kids. Thankfully, my children are in college now, so we don't have to worry about it as much. But you mentioned forced college and kids going to school and not doing as well, and therefore just coming out with debt, versus going to a vocational school and having, skills, hard skills, whether it's, plumbing, electrical, carpentry, whatever it is, and the difference. And I think that those are really good points, and that there is some level of forced college nowadays across, everybody shouldn't go to college, because we've got over $1 trillion, or $1.7 trillion in outstanding debt. We have an administration that's trying to forgive that debt. Alfredo mentioned, our litigation. We took the Biden administration to Supreme Court last year, and we were able to prevent that student loan bailout. But the administration continues to write rules through the Department of Education, trying to forgive debt in various ways. Now they're looking at how do they allow bankruptcy to discharge student loans. So they continue to rewrite the rules and do a workaround with the Supreme Court. How do we make not going to college cool again, and bringing back those skills and helping not just kids, but parents understand that not everybody needs to go to college, and you can still be a successful person who makes a great living and has a great life. And guess what? No debt.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting. If you look at the French-German model, about 30% of the kids go to college and 70% go to vocational. In the case of the Research Triangle, many of the CEOs of these companies came through that process. They didn't go through the normal college process. So for most students, if they get 2 years of college, which means they get additional math and science, and they earn the vocational skills, they're learning how to learn, they have the theory that they need, they can far surpass the college graduates. Here's another thing to look at. So parents tend to say, well, if you go to college, you're guaranteed a higher income by the fact that you went to college. But if you disaggregate and say, take the top 30 students, 30% that graduate versus the other 70, and disaggregate their income, those students in the bottom 70% will be making far less money than the average vocational student. And I think that's something, if we put that in front of parents, they would understand it. Because right now, all they understand, if I go to college, it's a meal ticket for a high income. Completely not true. It's only a high income for highly motivated, good students. In rough numbers, 30% of the students that go to college.
Now, Bob, one of the things that, if you look at the total cost, let's say almost on an annual basis of educating folks, whether it's our kids in our education system or what I call remedial training for our workforce, it's something like, I've seen some numbers like $1.5 trillion per year that's spent between private and public.
Unbelievable.
Is that about right? I mean, at least that's what I've heard.
I don't know the exact right number, but it's a big number.
Yeah, and the output really isn't that great. I mean, in terms of what we're actually spitting out of our system. The nice thing, what I think about your system, if I remember correctly, is that you're actually doing it for a lot less than what the average public education costs, with about $15,000 per student. I think you're doing it for about $8,000, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, right. Currently, we're in the 6,000 plus. We're kind of moving to about 7,000. So in North Carolina, we'd be about half the cost of public schools.
Yeah. So you really are proving that it's not that we need to throw more money at the system. We just need to improve the system and its output and its metrics of success, I guess, right?
Yeah, and the only way it can really improve is through competition. So think about in North Carolina, if you had thousands of operators, the market would sort it out, and the best operators would continue, and the weak ones would go out of business.
Yeah. Now, a couple of weeks ago, you helped moderate an incredible panel that had Governor Ducey, former Secretary of Education Betsy DeVos, Misha Maynor, who is one of our state reps in Georgia, and then Heidi Ganal, who was one of our board members, but also was a regent at Colorado University at CU. You guys talked about this idea of competition and ESAs, educational savings accounts. A lot of states, Republican governors are passing this. Governor Kim Reynolds, for example, one of the leading proponents of that. I know Governor Huckabee down in Arkansas also has done this, and others. I know you've been a big proponent of that. Can we shift gears a little bit and talk about kind of this ESA idea and why it's so important to try to get this on a broader basis across the whole country?
Yeah, in North Carolina, recently passed a bill that allows every student in the state to receive a North Carolina Opportunity Scholarship. Students in a much higher income only receive half the scholarship, but for 80% of the students, they receive a scholarship adequate to go to Thales Academy. It's an amazing thing. And this year, I think we've seen 8 or 10 states do something similar. ESA is a little different. It's a straight educational savings account.
Okay.
North Carolina is a scholarship, but
Okay.
there's various versions, but all of them allow students to go to private school of their choice, including a religious school, which brings in character formation, which is so important to our society. Also, there's another thing, we were talking about this morning, that individuals with common sense and good character make enormous contributions to our society, often overlooked. We tend to think, well, someone who went to an Ivy League college and received straight A's are the ones we focus on. Many of those people are causing more trouble than they're worth in the world. And we know this from the expert syndrome, whereas those people with common sense that are good family members make enormous contributions, including technology, to America.
Yeah, it really is amazing, what can be done with that. So there seems to be, though, amazingly, opposition from Republican legislators. For example, in Texas, it had gone pretty far down the road in the Texas House, and at the very last minute was pulled. Why do you think there's so much resistance for these different ideas, funding models, and stuff like that, to really help bring true reform to our education system?
I think the primary resistance is inertia, but in terms of rural legislators, the largest employer in their county is the public school system.
Okay.
And that means they have a lot of political support. And they tend to think, well, that school choice will never help my county, so why should I vote for it? As a point of fact, if you look in North Carolina, school choice has moved into rural counties. And it took a while to convince these members to vote for this plan. But we now have school choice in many rural counties and some really excellent schools. And if you think about it today, where people want out of the cities,
right?
This educational choice is really important to rural counties, because if they have good schools, people are going to move there, and they're going to reinvigorate these counties.
Yeah, it really is a great model. Elaine, I keep hogging your time here, so I apologize.
No, we're coming to the end of our time, and I wanted to thank Bob for his time and ask if he can share where our listeners and viewers may be able to find out more information on Thales Academy.
Yeah, you can buy a Thales Wade book from Amazon.com or other publications, or you can contact me at bob@captiveair.com. And I'm pleased to provide more information, or thalesacademy.com. So there's a lot of ways to contact us, and we're more than help. We have kind of an outreach program where we will help people start schools, give them the information, provide curriculum, etc. Because the goal is that every student in America would have a choice. And that if there's the most important thing we could do futuristic is to educate our students with good character development and have the family engaged in that process, not controlled by bureaucrats.
Yeah.
It sounds like a recipe for success. And there are other areas in our government where we need to inject competition as well, and we would see improvements. We know it works. We know it works in business. We know it works in our economic system overall. So it could definitely work in education. And I think you're proving that every day in North Carolina. So thank you for all you do. And thank you for joining us. Thank you for joining us on Main Street Matters, America's Small Business Megaphone. And for those of you watching and listening, you can subscribe to the show at salempodcastnetwork.com, and episodes debut every Wednesday and Friday. Thank you so much, and we'll see you next time.